In the shadows of the past, beyond the ancient hills bordering the Dead Sea, there existed a civilization that left its mark on the pages of biblical history. The Moabites. Born into a controversial lineage and persecuted for their reputation, the Moabites lived at the crossroads between great empires and faced the powerful forces of Israel. However, their story is much more than just tales of war and conflict. It is a story of misguided faith, abominable practices, and a people who, despite their transgressions, cannot be forgotten. Dear listener, this documentary will take us on a deep journey through the scriptures, exploring the origins, culture, and religion of the Moabites. We will see how their sinful practices and rebellion against God led to their downfall, and discover the legacy they left behind in the lands where Jordan is located today. Before continuing, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell so that YouTube will notify you every time we upload a new video. Let's get started. The Bible, in its pages, records surprising events and historical facts that amaze any reader. The remarkable thing about the Bible is that it does not hide those events where God shows his total rejection of pagan peoples, nor does it disguise the sins of biblical characters. Unlike other books that only present the positive aspects of their fables or stories, the Bible is unique in revealing God's truth in an integral and unadorned manner. Part of this story tells us about a people called Moab, an enemy of God's people. But before we delve into their relationship with Israel, let's start by understanding their history. The story of the origin of the Moabites begins with the story of Lot, Abraham's nephew. According to Genesis chapter 19, after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot and his two daughters took refuge in a cave. Fearing that their line would become extinct, Lot's daughters decided to get their father drunk and conceive children with him. From this incestuous relationship, two sons were born: Moab, progenitor of the Moabites, and Ben-Ami, father of the Ammonites. Let's read Genesis chapter 19, verse 37. And the eldest gave birth to a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. According to the popular etymology preserved in the Bible, the name Moab comes from the expression Mu'abi, meaning semen of my father, or simply Mem-Abi, which translates as of my father. Dear listeners, the origins of Moab are found in a history marked by incest, an act that was clearly outside of God's will. From the beginning, this people emerged from a relationship that did not reflect the divine plan. God had a higher purpose for Lot's family. But lack of discernment and impatience led to hasty decisions, ignoring the consequences that those actions would have in the future. Instead of seeking God's guidance, Lot's family acted on their own, resulting in the creation of a lineage that would face numerous hardships and be destined for constant conflict with God's people. The decisions made in that moment of desperation not only marked the fate of Moab, but also underscore the importance of understanding and following God's will, especially when circumstances seem overwhelming. Now, Moab was located on an elevated plateau east of the Dead Sea, in the region that today corresponds to west-central Jordan. This area, although mountainous and arid, also contained fertile areas that were ideal for agriculture and livestock raising, allowing the Moabite people to develop a sustainable economy. Moab's strategic location gave it a significant advantage, as it controlled important trade routes connecting Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Arabian Peninsula, contributing to its prosperity and relevance in the region. The importance of Moab in ancient times is evidenced by numerous archaeological finds in the region. For example, the Mesha stele, popularized in the 19th century as the Moabite stone, is a black basalt stone bearing an inscription of Mesha, a Moabite king from the 9th century before Christ, which was discovered in 1868. The 34-line inscription, the longest ever recovered from ancient Moab, was written in the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet and was erected by Mesha around 850 before Christ. The stele describes the same event as in 2 Kings chapter 3, but from the point of view of King Mesha of Moab. The Mesa stele is now on display at the Louvre in Paris, and the story of how it got there sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood movie. Now, returning to the history of Moab, its capital, Dibon, was a vital political and cultural center, where inscriptions and remains have been discovered that offer a clearer insight into Moabite life. Furthermore, other sites such as Adaroth and Medeba have yielded artifacts and inscriptions that reveal crucial details about the social organization, religious practices, and economic activities of the Moabites. These discoveries not only confirm the existence and influence of Moab, but also allow us to better understand how this ancient kingdom integrated and competed with neighboring civilizations. Now, Moabite culture was marked by its devotion to the god Chemosh, mentioned repeatedly in the Bible. Chemosh was a warrior god to whom the Moabites offered sacrifices, sometimes even human ones, in times of crisis. The Mesha stele, one of the most important artifacts found at Dibon, recounts the exploits of King Mesha and how he attributed his victories to Chemosh. Through these religious practices and devotion to Chemosh, the Moabites not only sought to secure divine protection, but also to assert their cultural identity and independence from their enemies, especially Israel. However, these same practices, especially human sacrifice, drew the condemnation of the Israelite prophets, who saw in Chemosh and Moabite worship a perversion of true divine principles. The Moabite religion was in stark contrast to Israelite monotheism. While the Israelites worshipped Jehovah exclusively and strictly followed the commandments set forth in the law of Moses, the Moabites practiced a polytheism centered on the veneration of Chemosh, their main god. One of the most striking examples of this devotion is found in the king of Moab, Mesha, who, in a desperate act during a war against Israel, offered his own son as a sacrifice to Chemosh. Let us read the second book of Kings chapter 3 verses 26 and 27. And when the king of Moab saw that he was overcome in battle, he took with him 700 men who drew swords to attack the king of Edom, but they could not. Then he took his firstborn son, who was to reign in his place, and offered him as a burnt offering on the wall. And there was great anger against Israel, and they turned away from him and returned to their own land. This act reveals the depth of the Moabite belief in the power of their God and highlights the radical differences between their religion and the Israelite faith, which condemned such practices as abominations. Now, when God freed the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt and led them toward the promised land, the land of Canaan, he gave them a solemn and emphatic warning. Jehovah ordered them that, upon arriving in that land, they should not mix with the inhabitants or adopt their customs, practices, or beliefs. He warned them that the influences of these pagan peoples could divert them from the path of obedience and fidelity to him, leading them to idolatry and disobedience. It was a crucial mandate to preserve their identity as a holy and separate people, dedicated exclusively to the service of God. Let's read Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 9 to 12. When you enter the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, or one who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For everyone who does these things is an abomination to the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord your God drives out these nations before you. These practices of magic and occultism were seen as a serious transgression against divine laws. In the Old Testament, strict penalties were imposed on those who engaged in such activities, reflecting the seriousness with which these practices were viewed in the spiritual life of God's people. In the New Testament, this position is reinforced by pointing out that those who persist in these practices are excluded from entering the kingdom of God. Now, the Moabites were not only known for their worship of Chemosh, but also for their sinful practices that led to divine condemnation. As we have been considering, one of the practices most hated by God was human sacrifice, a custom that is mentioned in several ancient texts and that is condemned in the Bible. In times of desperation, the Moabites sacrificed their own children to appease Chemosh, an abomination in the eyes of God. Furthermore, sexual immorality was another rampant practice among the Moabites. The incident at Baal Peor, recorded in Numbers chapter 25, it is a clear example of how the Moabites seduced the Israelites to participate in orgies and sexual rituals as part of the worship of their gods. This cultic prostitution not only violated God's commandments, but also provoked his wrath, resulting in a plague that killed 24,000 Israelites. Let's read Numbers chapter 25, verses 1 to 3. Now Israel was living in Shittim, and the people began to commit fornication with the daughters of Moab, who invited the people to sacrifice to their gods. And the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So the people went to Baal Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. Although Balaam's name is not mentioned in this chapter, we learn in Numbers chapter 31, verse 16, that he was responsible for the terrible corruption of the children of Israel described here. All of Balak's rewards failed to induce Balaam to curse Israel, but they did eventually persuade him to corrupt Israel by causing some of the people to commit fornication and idolatry with the daughters of Moab. Balaam's name and story became infamous, and he is referenced several times in the New Testament. Peter compares false teachers to Balaam, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. Jude repeats this statement and associates Balaam with the sale of the soul for money. Finally, Jesus speaks of Balaam when he warns the church at Pergamos of their sin. Let's read Revelation chapter 2, verse 14. But I have a few things against you, that you have there those who hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit fornication. Satan's tactics have not changed much. If he cannot curse God's people directly, he will try to do so through the back door, and idolatry and sexual immorality are his favorite temptations. Now, God hated Moab not only for its immoral and idolatrous practices, but also for its constant opposition to Israel. Moab, throughout its history, was a thorn in Israel's side, attacking and opposing God's people on several occasions. This resulted in God pronouncing severe judgments against Moab, as detailed in chapters 15 and 16 of the book of Isaiah, as well as in Jeremiah chapter 48. These texts describe in depth the devastation that was coming upon Moab, presenting it as a divine punishment due to their sins and transgressions. The history of Moab is intimately linked to that of Israel, both in conflict and cooperation. Next, we will examine several key episodes. First of all, the curse of Balaam. King Balak of Moab, fearful of the Israelite advance, hired the prophet Balaam to curse Israel. However, Balaam, directed by God, was unable to curse Israel and instead pronounced blessings. This account, found in Numbers chapters 22 and 24, is crucial to understanding the Moabite perception of Israel as a threat. In second place, the Baal Peor incident. In Numbers chapter 25, it is recounted how the Moabites seduced the Israelites into worshiping Baal, resulting in divine judgment. This incident reveals the religious and cultural tensions between the two nations. In third place, Ruth the Moabite. Despite hostilities, the story of Ruth, a Moabite who converted to Judaism and married Boaz, is an example of redemption and grace. Ruth, ancestor of King David, shows how divine inclusion transcends ethnic and cultural barriers. Now, the biblical prophecies about Moab were destined to be fulfilled over time, reflecting the influence and actions of regional powers. As history progressed, Moab began to face increasing pressure from powerful empires such as Assyria and Babylon. There is evidence that Moab was under the yoke of Assyria. The Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser III mentioned Salamanu of Moab among those who paid him tribute. Sennacherib claims to have received tribute from Camusunadbi, the king of Moab, and the Assyrian monarchs Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal say that the Moabite kings Musuri and Kamashaltu were subject to them. Furthermore, there are archaeological findings that indicate that many places in Moab were depopulated around the 8th century before Christ. Jeremiah's prophecy pointed to the time when Jehovah would use the Babylonians, led by Nebuchadnezzar, to call Moab to account. Many Moabite cities were to be completely desolate. The Jewish historian Josephus writes that in the 5th year after having desolated Jerusalem, Nebuchadnezzar returned to make war on Koli Syria, Ammon, and Moab, and then attacked Egypt. Archaeological finds confirm the desolation of Moab. Archaeological research has shown that Moab was largely depopulated from about the beginning of the 6th century and many areas from the 8th century. From the 6th century onwards, there were nomadic groups in that land. Until in the last centuries before Christ, political and economic factors made sedentary life possible again. There is no denying that the prophecies concerning Moab were fulfilled exactly. The Moabites ceased to exist as a people centuries ago. However, its legacy persists in the region of Jordan, where the remains of its cities and artifacts continue to be studied. This documentary ends by inviting us to reflect deeply on the importance of remembering and studying civilizations such as that of Moab. Although Moab's history was marked by conflict, immorality, and rebellion against God, its legacy left a significant mark on the history of Israel. The study of Moab offers us valuable insight into the complexities of the ancient Near East and how each people, large and small, contributed to the rich tapestry of human history. Furthermore, the story of Moab serves as a warning about the consequences of straying from God's ways. It reminds us of the seriousness of decisions and actions in relation to divine principles and underlines the importance of faithfulness to His commandments. And so we come to the end of this video. Thank you for being part of our channel. God bless you abundantly. Until the next video.